Good morning. Today I'm going to speak of the shift from oral language to written language. First of all, a few very fast elements that do not need right now to be developed. The first element, and it is fundamental, there cannot be any written language if there is not an oral language before. Silvia Ferrara, among others, cuts the written language or the writing system from the language itself. For me, it is unwise, let's say. The written system or the writing system is representing the language it is developed for. Then a few more elements are essential and no details. First of all, the development of language all started with hominins and not necessarily Homo sapiens. It started with hominins leaving the forest to live in a savanna. That required a change of hunting procedure because they were not hunting small animals trapped in the forest. They were hunting animals that were running fast in the savanna. They had to change the hunting procedure. This change of hunting procedure moved those hominins who were bipedal already from plain walking, and a lot of climbing by the way, to running to catch the animals they were targeting in the savanna. And for security reasons, since the savanna does not have many protective elements, they had to run fast to escape from some of the savanna animals. Those various mutations that were chosen to enable those hominins and later on Homo sapiens to become runners were concerning the foot. The architecture of the foot completely changed, and particularly with Homo sapiens. Then the larynx that had to be deeper than in before, the subglottal area and the glottis that had to be restructured and better connected with the brain via the nerves covering this area. The articulatory system had to be changed, that is the jaws, the chin and the teeth that are essential to enable Homo sapiens and before him some hominins to breathe, respiratory system, to breathe deeply and fast. The sinuses had to be also restructured in many ways, and of course the essential diaphragm, which is the piston of the machine that governs the breathing. All those, and that is essential, all those mutations that were chosen naturally to enable hominins and Homo sapiens to run fast, and with Homo sapien to run fast over long distance, that is called endurance running, have a collateral side effects. They are all providing those hominins and Homo sapiens with the elements that are necessary for Homo sapiens to develop articulated language. Then the next element to be taken into account very fast is the fact that all brains, for I would say probably all animals, are able to remember what they see, feel, experience in order to recognize the situations or the individuals they meet there in order to survive. And this is registered in the brain of those animals, even the brain of a mosquito, so that they can recognize and hence avoid what is dangerous and go after what is profitable. Homo sapiens is in no way different. Everything, all the sensations from the eyes, the ears, the body, and so on, are registered in a way or another by the brain in what I call a brain-machine code. And what is essential here is that Homo sapiens, and maybe some hominins just before, developed from this brain-machine code a new way of exploiting their experience, and that is going to be articulated language. Then at the beginning they had the possibility to pronounce many vowels, a, e, o, u, and others, the many consonants, maybe 20 or something. At first they only started blabbering, ba ba ba, mama, anything you want. Listen to children before they start using words, and then they moved to communication, that is to say something to someone else, that is covering what they experience and want to say. And those are based on the fact that the brain-machine code for various items are going to be replaced by some clusters of vowels and consonants that becomes their names. And so a thing, anything, person or object or plant or animal, are going to be designated by a cluster of consonants and vowels. And that is because the development of articulated language, the various mutations I've spoken of, make it possible for hominins before Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens to produce thousands and thousands of clusters that are autonomous. And that is possible because of a very important articulation which is known as the rotation of vowels and consonants. You know, you can start with bat. If you rotate the consonants, the first consonant of bat, you can have cat, you can have dat, you can have fat, you can have hat, you can have jat, you can have lat, you can have mat, you can have nat, you can have pat, and you can have sat, rat, and tat, and even vat, you know, you pay it all time, and some others even zat, if you want to have zat and use that as a name. That's the rotation of the first consonant. The vowels, you can have exactly the same thing. Bat, beat, bot, boot, bet, and so on, with the same rotation of the first consonant. And you can have the rotation of the second, final consonants. And when you multiply those things, you come to thousands of clusters of one consonant, one vowel, and one consonant again. And that cluster, if you rotate the vowels and the consonant, gives you thousands of elements. You can use those elements to designate all the items you have found in your life, and that is a lot. When you reach that point, that language deserves or needs some kind of an architecture, which is not enough just one element after another element after a third element and so on, concatenation. You need to have an architecture. They find this architecture in the matrix of communication that brings or that gives you the matrix of the syntax of the language. This matrix is fundamental and it is very simple to understand. You have this matrix here. You imagine on the top a baby who is crying because he needs something. This baby is the agent and at the same time is the source of the action which is crying. That crying is a core, and that core is what is concerned the theme of the relation. And it has an object, a goal. It is a call for something which is not necessarily specified when you have a baby who is crying all by himself. And this can be reversed systematically. The goal, the person that the call is addressed to, becomes the agent and the source of what this person is going to do, the action, the relation, in order to satisfy the need of the baby, and that satisfaction is what he uses to satisfy the need of the baby is the theme this time. It is going to be food, for instance, if it is what is concerned here, and the goal is the baby itself. When you have this architecture, you find out that I've just showed you, you have the basic syntactic functions of the communicational situation that are becoming the syntactic functions of the sentence. This is fundamental, and this goes very far, because from there you have shifted from articulated language, which is just a big, enormous mass of clusters of vowels and consonants. You have shifted it to a constructed architecture that contains a structure of functions and a structure of meanings. And both the meanings and the functions are articulated together in order to give you some kind of articulated language, an utterance, a sentence, a paragraph, anything you want, communication anyway. That's already important, and that is the very first stage of the development of language. When you have reached that point, you enter a second level, which is this time the shift from language to representation. It can be a pure deictic representation, you point at what you're talking of. It can be an imitation, a mimic, you imitate the animal you're speaking of with gestures, with tone, with intonation. You imitate a person, you imitate a situation, and it's a mimic. It can be a drawing, of course, and you draw the animal. It can be a painting too, like in the caves, but it can be symbolic. That is to say, and that is true at all levels of archaeological caves that have been inhabited by hominins or Homo sapiens or Neanderthals, they left there some kind of inscriptions in the rock that are what we would call today, though they didn't know what it was or they didn't have the concept of those elements, a triangle, a rectangle, a square, a circle, and many others. These symbolic elements come from, and that is a real question, not nature, because you can't find triangles in nature. Even circles are rare, pure circles, squares and rectangles and so on. Those shapes do not exist in nature, but they are apparently coming from the architecture of the central nervous system of the hominin and Homo sapiens at the end. And those are called entoptics. That is, optics that are inside the body. We see those shapes. We naturally see them because they are inscribed in a way or another on our or in our eyes, on our retina, and in our nervous system. Genevieve van Bettinger found out, because she actually looked in all the caves, Homo sapiens caves, in Europe and Indonesia, that have been decorated with paintings and symbols, those kind of symbols I'm talking of, since about 45,000 years before Christ. She published a book on the subject, and she gives us 32 of those symbols, and here they are, 32 symbols that are purely geometric, that are found everywhere in the world at the same time and after, starting around 45,000. The point is that Homo Naledi, who has just been discovered in South Africa, who was living in caves, had exactly the same kind of symbols, geometric symbols, inscribed over the tombs or around the tombs of the people of the Homo Naledis who actually died and were buried in some burial chambers underground. And those symbols, we don't know what they mean. And they developed hashtags to over the graves. We don't know what they mean, except that we can very easily think, since there are graves that have been dug out, the body put in, and then covered up with dust and dirt, we can, of course, think that the people who actually spend a lot of time with a special tool which had to come from outside, a very strong and hard stone, to inscribe in a hard stone of the cave those hashtags, they were saying something while they were doing it. They were saying a ritualistic formula that was used when the body was put in a grave. That formula could include the name of the person, the position of the person in the community, or many other elements purely ritualistic. The person, Lee Berger, who actually discovered those Naledi and these caves, found out many inscriptions of that type, and some of them obviously had a patina on it, that because they had been touched by hands. We are underground. There is no light. It's darkness. How do you recognize where you are and what grave you want to visit? Only by touching those symbols over the graves that give you the identity, the reference, and so on. The ritualistic formula that goes along with the grave. And when you get to that point, you find out that those triangles, purely symbolic, purely geometric, are actually representing, are the symbol of, formulas that are behind and that we don't know. those symbolic forms or signs are definitely a form of writing. Naledi used that 300,000 years ago. Neanderthal actually used it in Gibraltar in one cave, the same thing or about the same thing, 100,000 years ago. For Homo sapiens, we only have archaeological proof that goes back to 45,000 years before Christ, or ago, 1 or 2,000, more or less doesn't change the fact that Naledi was very precocious, Neanderthal was slightly precocious, and then Homo sapiens was late? Probably not. Because for things to come to us through hundreds of thousands of years, it has to be engraved on a permanent medium, and that's the real problem with archaeology. We can only know what has reached us, and I'm pretty sure that Homo sapiens used non-durable media before starting painting his caves. He might have used leaves, he might have used bark, he might have used wood even, but all those disappeared. And so the next and last stage to get into what we call writing, to a writing system, is to attach to the sounds, either phonemes, individual sounds, or syllables. Those are the two main writing systems that we know. We attach to them some geometric symbols that are easy to reproduce and that correspond to those sounds. Alphabetical, as we say, or syllabic writing. It can also be before becoming syllabic, like the old Egyptian hieroglyphs, like the old Maya glyphs, and so on. It can be purely symbolic and representational at the same time, and corresponding to a whole word, at times to a whole expression, phrase, sentence. But it becomes, after a while, we shift from that symbolic way of writing to the alphabetical symbolic way of writing. But this time, the symbols are for sounds or syllables of sounds. When you have reached that point, and that's the writing system, the phylogeny of the writing system, it is absolutely continuous. There is no break, even if Miss Silvia Ferrara says there is a break. No, there is no break. It's a perfectly continuous process. And every single step in that process is the result of what came before and is the announcement of what is going to come afterwards. It is a result of what came before, so it is a post-gression, and at the same time an announcement of what is coming after, that is to say, a progression. And you are constantly in between post-gression and progression, that is the result of the past and the announcement of the future. There is no break between in that line. Writing then has another important approach has to be considered. And there we owe it to Marshall McLuhan, who considered that any technical, let's say, development in the civilization of Homo sapiens, of humans, is the extension of something that is connected with the body or parts of the body. What is writing, the written language, an extension of? First of all, it's very easy to say that it is an extension of the oral language. It is an extension that is, as Mr. Stephen Mithen would say, it is holistic, multimodal, manipulative, musical, and mimetic. That is one element, like writing, and the writing system, is multimodal because it brings together oral and visual. It also brings together physical action to write, another physical action to read. So it is, you see, multimodal. It uses various possibilities of the body and the mind. It is manipulative because it is communication. It is directed at someone else, for that someone else to react, to answer, to respond to what we say. It is musical because intonation, tone, and many other things, speeds, slow down, speed up, and all that is expressive. And it is mimetic because of body language and facial language, expression of the face. And those elements are fundamental in communication. You're always speaking with your body to anyone you're speaking to. That written language that's writing, is the extension of not only language, but also of the media used to write the language. The media, there are many media that have completely disappeared because they dissolved with time. We can only have the media that were durable: stone, ivory, tusks, bones, and at times wood, if wood was kept in some kind of a place, condition that enabled it to survive. For instance, we have just discovered in Zambia some big pieces of wood that were obviously worked upon in order to be assembled into some kind of platform. And those elements were discovered in a site that was hundreds of thousands of years old, which means that those, and they're probably Homo sapiens, but not necessarily only Homo sapiens, in Zambia, Black Africa, were the ancestors of our species, and they were doing things like building wooden platforms before anyone else in the world, as far as we know. Because wood dissolves normally because of the weather, but in some conditions, some wood can survive that kind of decay because it is kept in some kind of mud or ground that enables it to survive. The media have to be durable if we want to know, or if we want to know what they did a long time ago. But these media that are durable produce or enable a writing system to become something that is going to last, so that is going to be durable. But it has to be sustainable. To be sustainable, that writing system must be able to be transmitted and hence learned by people who didn't initially develop it. And second, It must survive in time, that is to say, it must remain used up to the present. If it disappears along the way in time, it is the evidence that this writing system was not sustainable enough in the conditions in which it was developed to survive a short period of time when the community used it. Then what is in present time, if you take a child at school who is learning how to read and write, what is written language an extension of? It is an extension of the hand, because you write with your fingers and your hands, left or right, who cares? That's not the point. It is an extension of your eye, because to write you need to guide your hands in its movements with your eyes. It is also an extension of your ear, because writing is transcribing oral sounds into visual signs. And finally, this language is carrying meaning, so it is also the extension of the mind because of that meaning. Then you come to an idea that is fundamental: language and mind. Which one produce the other? The mind is a virtual construction in the brain, and that construction is enabled to deal with abstract elements, meaning things that are not material because they cannot be touched, they can only be thought. The mind is that virtual apparatus, virtual organ that is enabled you to capture things that are not directly material, or the dimension that is not directly material of the things you can see around you. And that mind develops because on those objects that developed or that exist around you, you have been attaching some of the clusters of sounds from your lexicon, those thousands of clusters, and you have given names to those things. So those things become virtual by the symbolic dimension of the names the mind has given to those objects. And this is fundamental. The mind develops because the language develops, and the language develops because the mind develops. The two develops in a parallel way, reciprocally causing the development of the other. Then you come to the various steps in the mental, this time, procedure. At the very beginning there is a brain, the brain and the senses, and the brain is able to discriminate in the sensory impulses that come from the nerves to the brain, to discriminate elements like objects, like persons, but they don't have yet, or the brain doesn't have yet, a language, so they're going to work in brain machine code. That machine code will enable the brain to remember, to recognize, and that is true for animals. Your dog recognizes you because in his brain he has registered you under a certain brain machine code element that is for him the element that triggers the recognition. It's not really a name because it doesn't have any kind of vocal expression. It is only brain machine code. discriminating. And on that basis, then hominins and Homo sapiens are going to develop some kind of language, as I've explained, as soon as they get thousands of clusters of vowels and consonants. They're going to name. And the naming of those elements that are discriminated by your brain is bringing the mind into existence, and the mind that is brought into existence is going to develop the naming procedure into a language. The next stage is to conceptualize. Of course, you can say, my dog is one particular dog, and that's all. It's purely a reference to your particular dog. But you can also say, dogs are useful animals. A dog is a useful animal. The dog is a useful animal. And there it's no longer one particular dog that is concerned, but it is a whole number of dogs covered by the same name, dog. It has been conceptualized. That conceptualization is an important process as soon as you speak of education, of learning, of kids. And the best approach I know of the various steps and stages of conceptualization from birth to 18 years of age is what Lev Vygotsky, actually produced in the Soviet Union in the late 20s and early 30s. But I'm not going to enter details there. If you are interested in the conceptualization power of Homo sapiens, of humans, I think that you have to get into Vygotsky. And at the same time, don't forget Piaget, which is slightly different, less systematic probably, but the two together, they didn't know each other when when Vygotsky was still alive. He died in 1936. Piaget lived a long time after that. They didn't know each other. Piaget actually said so. And but they are complementary. But apart from that, the mind there is behind conceptualization. That is to draw from what you observe and attach the various characteristics of what you observe to the noun. So dog is no longer one particular dog, but dog is a four-legged, furry animal that barks, and so on and so on. Those characteristics are going to produce the concept of the dog, and some animals who really don't look at all like your dog are dogs, because they have the same characteristics, even if they don't look like yours. Then beyond that, you step to representing. Representing, I've already said, there are many ways of representing, but painting, drawing, and body mimic are the main ways to represent the concept you're speaking of. And after representing, you come to symbolizing. That is to say, it's no longer a drawing that represents the item you're talking of, but it is a pure symbol that is no longer visually connected with what it is used for. I mean, what it is used to name some kind of item. Those symbols can be very arbitrarily attached to the various objects you're talking of, and at the same time, you can even go beyond objects and you can get to symbols of letters, not letters, but sounds. And those, when there are symbols of sounds, those sounds and those symbols become phonemes if they are sounds, letters if they are written down. And that leads you to writing and a writing system. There are many writing systems. You must understand that symbolizing and writing are not only individual, they are collective and at the same time as individual. Symbolizing, the symbols have to be shared with the people in your community so that you can communicate. Otherwise, you can't. You're only speaking to yourself. And writing, same thing. It has to be collectively accepted. The debate on the way to write things, spelling and inclusive orthography, there's a big debate in France right now, is typical. If there's no agreement, consensus in the community about it, you can let people do what they want, but communication may be hampered because of the use of a certain spelling that is ambiguous for some people. And finally, you must understand then that what we are using there is a very complex procedure from discriminate by the brain, name by the mind that is born as soon as the brain decides to name objects, then conceptualize, then represent, then symbolize, you reach right. It is a continuous process. There is no break in that process. It is the phylogeny of writing, and the phylogeny of writing goes as far as you can imagine. And that is not all we could say about that. That symbolic writing is interesting if you go into some old writing system and you find out that, for instance, in all the caves in Europe or Indonesia, you find dots, and generally not one particular dot alone, but series of dots. And people say Cro-Magnon didn't know how to count. Bullshit. BS. Cro-Magnon is older than the Mayas, but the Mayas used a system of counting or writing down their counting that is based on two elements. There you have this codec comes from Mexico. It is Maya, and you have at the top of each picture, top right of each picture, you have a bundle with a bow on top and many dots. Those many dots are the number of superior groups of 20, and the bundle are the number of elements in the lowest group of 20. Their counting system is based on 20. It's a vigesimal counting system, and the number that is produced by, for instance, the one on the right for you, which is the left for me, is the bundle is 2 bars, that makes 10. Those are days, so you have 10 days, and then you have exactly a certain number of dots. Each dot is the higher level, which means 20, Each dot is 20 days, so you count the number of dots and you get, you multiply by 20, plus you add the initial 10, and you have the number of days you have to count to shift from one phase of Venus to the next phase of Venus, which is the next page. In the codex, this is a very simple way of writing down the numbers that you are using orally most of the time. But it's the same thing with Roman numbers. The vertical bars for unities, the V for 5, the X for 10, and then the others afterwards. It's purely visual, but it has no connection whatsoever with the names of the numbers that are behind. If you take 8, which is a V for 5, and on the right 3 vertical bars, it's a convention and nothing else that tells me it is 8. It could be anything else if the convention were different. And you can go on with such examples. The Arab or Arabic figures that we use all over the world. Those Arabic figures have little to do with the numbers they represent. Why 8 is a vertical omega? Why 7 is what it is? It comes from conventions, which are, and I repeat that those words are, those numbers are Arabic, that comes from a culture which is not even our culture. We have integrated them a long time ago, and now here they are. So when you work like that, you find out that actually writing is a very complex procedure, but a very complex procedure that has to be sustainable, that is to say, can be learned, can be used across time to conserve information, and more than information, works of art, literature, and so on, documents of any kind, and at the same time it has to be so durable, on a durable medium, and sustainable, that is learned and reproduced, but also survive in time. If it is attached too much to one particular language, if the language disappears, the writing system it had developed will disappear at the same time. Whereas some writing systems have been generalized via colonialization to languages that were not written before, like African languages. They didn't have any writing system per se, they remembered, and some people were memory people who had to remember everything, and they didn't write it down. Their memory was transmissible, yes, so it was durable in a way by being transmitted to next generation people, but at the same time, was it sustainable? When we reconstitute some African documents of the 13th century, for instance, the first constitution of the Empire of Mali, that was written in the 13th century, when Mali was finally taken over by Islam, this document has never been written, and yet we reconstitute it via long distance memory, things that have been kept in mind from one generation to the next among those people who are memory people, and griots they are often called, and then we can say this is a document. Sustainable there comes from the fact that memory can be sustainable if it is transmitted to the people in the next generation. And so things have been able to survive even when the empire itself, the system itself, and even at times the language itself disappeared. And that's what I wanted to say, and that is complicated and complex, and there will be a lot more to say about it, but that is the transfer from, or the transfer from oral language to written language. And that will be all for today. So I can say good afternoon if it is already the afternoon, or a good day if it is another time in the day. Bye.